I don't subscribe to a lot of things. I don't subscribe to the idea that video game journalists are bad at video games. I don't subscribe that video game journalists have this disconnect between what's actually the way that gamers play video games and the way that games are reviewed. So when IGN released their review for Kill la Kill the game If and gave it a 5.3, it came as quite a shock to me. Video game reviews are always biased, and anyone that's looking for an unbiased review is an idiot. There is no such thing. Everyone has their own gaming background, everyone has their preferences, the stuff they like, the stuff they dislike, so it's not like everyone needs to like Kill la Kill the game. But after I reviewed the game myself and called it a new staple for 3D arena fighters because the game is that good, the 5.3 score seemed a bit low. So what I thought I'd do today is go through the IGN review and figure out exactly what happened here. And before actually jumping into it, I also want to say that IGN has the worst reputation, but I don't believe and I don't subscribe to the idea that IGN as a whole or everyone that works at IGN is a bad journalist. I think it's important to look at the author and who they are and what they've done in the past. And the author of this review was Mike Epstein, and he's kind of all over the place. It's hard to know how he feels about anime games or 3D arena brawlers because he's reviewed, I don't know, Stranger Things more recently, Outer Wilds, Pathway, Ghost Giant, and none of these scores seem outrageous. They're kind of the average IGN 7s, 8s across the board. So that really doesn't tell us much. I mean, he gave Dragon Ball FighterZ 3.5 stars, so maybe that's a sign that maybe he's looking for something else in these games. Anyway, let's jump into the review. At first glance, Kill la Kill the game If passes the fighting game smell test. Kill la Kill the game If feels like a stripped down version of the prototypical 3D anime fighter. Its loose, mashy fighting fails to create the opportunities for strategic depth that I've come to expect in great fighting games. So this is sort of an introduction paragraph. It kind of lays out what to expect out of this review. It feels like a stripped down version of the prototypical 3D anime fighter. I can see how it could feel that way because it doesn't have a lot of characters, and typically 3D anime fighters have a ton of characters, but then they lack in mechanical depth, which I believe is the bet that Kill la Kill made. They made each character very unique, gave each character a very different moveset, very distinct, and they bet on fighting mechanics rather than roster size. The sentence that comes afterwards kind of bothers me. It's loose, mashy fighting fails to create opportunities for strategic depth. Like, this is straight up false. I have never seen a 3D arena fighter with so much strategic depth as Kill la Kill the game. I mean, if you press the square button, a combo comes off, but you're not gonna win matches by just doing that, not against higher level players. Kill la Kill the game If is a fairly basic version of what we've seen in other 3D anime fighting games like Jump Force or the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm series. Unlike those games, Kill la Kill's matches are one-on-one duels that take place on dull, flat arenas. I would like to agree with this. I think they nailed the style, I think they nailed the aesthetic of the show, but that mostly comes through in the special attacks and the character models. The stages themselves could have used a lot of work for sure. The fighting is very simple, with each character using his or her own versions of the same 3 attacks: a close range punch or strike, a chargeable long distance projectile, or a dash attack. What? The projectile or dash attack? It's not the same thing at all. The dash and the projectile are two completely different abilities. This is confusing. And a slow moving heavy hit that breaks your opponent's guard. Here's the thing. Every character has the same buttons: a close range attack, a long range attack, a break attack. And the fact that each character has their own versions of that is what makes those characters unique. So we're off to a terrible start, because you call this a basic version of Jump Force or Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm, which I could accept if you went the route of it has less characters, the stages don't look as good, or whatever. But no, you went into mechanics, which is exactly where this game shines compared to those other games. Though the controls are simple, the characters' attack styles are not completely identical. Thank you for mentioning that. Certain characters have variations that may push you to approach a fight in specific, sometimes unintuitive ways. For example, Iragamagori. Gamagori is unintuitive to play, but that's exactly what makes him different. If Gamagori was just another character with fast close range attacks and projectiles, then I guess this game could have 60 characters because they all would play the same and they wouldn't need to spend as much time developing each character's gimmick individually and balancing each gimmick to work within the full game. Every good fighting game has characters that are unintuitive, and cracking the code, taking those characters into the lab and learning how they're supposed to be played is what makes those characters strong and unique in the long run. Unfortunately, there are no character-specific tutorials to help you learn each of their variations, so you will need to figure out how each character works through trial and error. Yeah, that's how most fighting games work. Even games with character-specific tutorials, you're gonna have to figure out most of the stuff on your own or look it up online. Though the attacks and fighting styles distinguish one character from another, it's hard to avoid the feeling that you're just smashing your way to victory. Okay, this is just, I'm sorry, I hate to do this, but this is playing the game wrong. I hate that sentence, I hate that saying, but you take this smashy style online and you're just gonna get beat up. And it's not because, oh, he mashed better. No, it's because you don't understand the game and you think mashing is the way to win. This is the least mashy 3D arena I've ever seen. And it feels like you're all over the place, or you simply didn't understand the mechanical depth. With an air dash that can reach your opponent from any distance and a lot of single button combos, it still feels like just rushing in and mashing an attack button is the optimal strategy. Well, if you just rush in and start mashing buttons, there is a very easy counter to that, which is tilting the stick vertically and hitting the attack button. Universally, every character has an anti-dash mechanic. So if you're telling me that rushing in and mashing is the optimal strategy, then I'm telling you that just doing this is the counter. Hey, you've countered that very simple fighting style. And after you counter that, then your opponent needs to approach you in a completely different way. Would you say that using super dash and mashing buttons is the optimal way to win in Dragon Ball FighterZ? I mean, situationally you can do that, but super dash has a very obvious punish, which is the down heavy. And it's the same thing with Kill la Kill If. There's a very obvious and easy punish to the homing dashes, which is vertical attack. So again, this isn't looking good. It just feels like he didn't understand the fighting system. Next, he talks about Bloody Valor. Not a fan of injecting random tide-turning game mechanics into fighting games, putting stat boosts and a match-winning attack at the end of a minigame that separates the prospect of winning from your skill in combat and undermines the fight as a whole. It is a tide-turning game mechanic, it is not random by any means. The player who initiated Bloody Valor gets a benefit out of Bloody Valor. They can choose to get health, they can choose to get special meter, they can choose to deal damage to the opponent. And if you can read what they're gonna choose, you can counter them with your own option. Of course, the first player might know that and he can mix you up by going for something different, but that's mind games. The stat boosts, I feel like, are essential for some characters, and they actually dictate the way you play the game with those characters. I've talked about it before, but Gamagori, I feel like he's a character that needs at least one Valor, otherwise he's one of the worst characters in the game. And meanwhile, other characters like the base Satsuki, she doesn't really need any Valor to fight. More often than not, you'll see Satsuki players using their special meter for special attacks rather than initiating Bloody Valor. And that is something that makes each character's playstyle, once again, very unique. It's not just the moveset, the Bloody Valor levels also matter a lot. So random, it is just not random. It can be a tide-turning game mechanic for sure, but it is not random by any means. The campaigns are short. Each one takes about 3 hours to complete. Whoa! Both of them combined take 3 hours to complete. What? Satsuki took 90 minutes. Ryuko took slightly longer. Let's say an hour and 45 minutes. What do you mean 3 hours each? What are you playing? What? Both feel like they drag on for far too long. They're so short! What? Including a mix of standard one-on-one matches, three-way duels, and brawler-esque engagements with dozens of generic cover opponents. The multi-character fights and brawls add some variety, but all three types are used repeatedly, so they don't feel especially refreshing by the end. You have three-way duels where it's free-for-all, you have three-way duels where characters team up against you, you have three-way duels where you team up with multiple characters against one big boss fight, and you have the brawler-esque sections as well, and not to mention straight up one-on-one boss fights and the unique characters that they give you control over in story mode. And we're talking about, once again, a 3-hour story mode. All the stuff that I mentioned adds a lot of variety. These types are used repeatedly. That is so misleading, man. He says that they don't feel refreshing by the end, and that's personal, that's subjective, that's his opinion, that's fine, we can't call that as wrong. but I highly disagree with the previous statement. The real issue with the campaigns are the wait times between fights. What? Long cutscenes separate each match full of expository dialogue that rushes you through the plot. The changes sprinkled throughout feel like they exist to facilitate fights rather than make the story interesting in a new way. That is, if you don't think they make the story interesting in a new way, I mean, I'm with you, I agree. I don't think this game made the story interesting in a new way. But the cutscenes are trying to tell a new plot. The cutscenes are trying to tell a new story. They're not just there to facilitate fights. The perpetual wait to pick up your controller and start playing tested my patience to the point where I wasn't particularly interested in watching. It's a good point to mention that the cutscenes are skippable. Yeah, and if you don't like the cutscenes too much, but the gameplay and story mode is fun, hey, the cutscenes are skippable might be a good detail to mention in your review. The training and local versus modes only unlock after completing the first chapter. Online play isn't available until after chapter 6. I think most fighting game fans would agree that this is a cardinal sin. There will always be people who just want to jump into fighting with friends or simply don't care about the campaign. 100% agree. This is something I mentioned in my review too. Personally, it does not bother me because this is the way I play fighting games. I usually start with the story, get a feel for the mechanics that way, maybe even get a feel for a couple of different characters, even though in Kill la Kill you always play as the same characters. But yeah, in fighting games, that's how I usually start playing, and then I jump into training mode, into online. So I just played this game the way I play every other fighting game, and it didn't bother me personally. But it bothered him, and I think this is a fair point that he brings up, and this is why it's important to know who's reviewing your game. It doesn't bother me because this is how I play games, so it's not gonna affect my personal score. It bothers him and maybe other fighting game fans who just like to jump into training mode and multiplayer right away, and they have to sit through the story. Knowing the personality of the person that is reviewing is important, and I think this is a very good example of why. A note on online play. Was this added later? Separating the different types of matchmaking feels needlessly restrictive and may make it harder for players to find matches one way or the other. What? Separating between casual and ranked matches? Is this really something you're gonna attack? You just came from a sentence that said, and I think most fighting games would agree, is a cardinal sin, talking about the other game modes being locked behind story. And now, you're attacking the game for separating ranked and casual matches? That really makes me question how much this guy knows about fighting games in general. And for him to evoke fighting game fans on top of that in his review, and now being like, why does it separate ranked and casual match? Are you for real right now? On the plus side, in the 5 matches I was able to play on PlayStation 4 ahead of launch, I experienced no serious lag or connection issues. This game's netcode is probably the best I've ever seen in any fighting game, period. Pre-launch and post-launch, I'm able to play games from Europe to America, from Europe to Australia with no lag at all. The cutscenes lag at the very start, and then by the time the cutscenes are over, during the actual match, the game is just completely fine. It's like you're playing right next to the guy. If this is not an impressive feat, then I don't know what is. The fighting games have been struggling with netcodes for ages now. Ages. Saying that, oh, I was able to play 5 matches experiencing no lag or connection issues, like, it's seriously downplaying what this game accomplishes. You'll also unlock new modes, various collectibles, and other characters as you progress, growing the paltry starting roster of 6 fighters to a still meager 10, including secondary versions of the 2 story protagonists. 2 more characters are coming as free DLC later this summer, but even 12 characters feels light. This is one of those things that is objectively bad about this game. It's a fighting game, a $60 game, with 10, let's say even 12 playable characters later this summer. That's a very short roster. That's a very small roster by any fighting game standards. No one was expecting a 40 game roster. No one was expecting Naruto Storm or Jump Force sizes of roster. But a number closer to 20 would make the $60 price point a bit more digestible. In addition to the story mode, Kill la Kill the Game has a few extra single player modes, including a training room, a single player survival challenge, yada yada yada. Though these modes present options to play solo using any fighter, including the more interesting characters not usable in the main campaigns, they lose their luster quickly with such a small roster. Yeah, like I said in my review too, that these modes don't really do much for me. They're nice extras to have, but yeah, they lose their luster quickly. I fully agree. He finally mentioned the training room, but after going so hard on, you know, this game has no mechanical depth, the fact that he just threw training room in here and didn't talk about all the options that you can have, like, this is a proper training mode. Just further reiterates my point of he didn't even try to understand this game's mechanical depth. Despite some great looking cel-shaded graphics, Kill la Kill the Game feels carelessly put together. Carelessly? I'd hate to be a developer right now reading this. Fuck, that is harsh. With a shallow roster to match his shallow fighting system. Okay, this is false. the fighting system isn't shallow by any means. This is just a lie. It lacks both the breadth and depth to make competitive play interesting. Again, a fucking lie. And its story mode that's simultaneously long-winded. 3-hour story mode. Total. Long-winded. And brief fails to make up for an overall lack of interesting content. 5.3. Looks good but lacks mechanical depth, narrative nuance, or a breadth of content to match. Like, I can't agree with the breadth of content. It's a short story mode and you don't have a lot of characters to play around with. Like, I can't agree with this. I can see myself agreeing with this. Narrative nuance, I wasn't a fan of the story, so sure, but lacks mechanical depth. That's, I think, the whole crux behind this score. The whole thing is, this person did not take the time to understand the game's mechanics. Especially when he compares it to Naruto Storm and Jump Force and praises those games in comparison to this one. He made a very superficial analysis of the fighting system. And it all becomes so obvious when you read this review. When you read this last paragraph of lacks the breadth and depth to make competitive play interesting. This is the most competitive arena fighter ever made. This game will be at Anime Evo this weekend, and it's been on events for the longest time, and you've seen professional players going like, yeah, there's something to this. And here comes Mike Epstein going like, nah, you just smashed to win. Wow, he cracked the code, didn't he? This review did not give this game its fair shot. It just went with the stereotypes that are associated with 3D arena fighters. And the thing is, if someone comes to this review, sees the score, reads what he wrote, they're gonna go like, oh yeah, it's what I expected. It's another 3D anime fighter. Like, yeah, they're all bad. There are things here that I can agree on. There are other things that are not for me to disagree because they are his opinion. But there is also a lot that is just wrong and it's false, and that's bad. You put your name on this review revealing a clear lack of understanding of what this game does, and you clearly did not look into this game's mechanics deep enough. You assumed it was a mashy game, you did the mashing worked, or maybe not, because it took you 3 hours to beat the story with each character, and you went, yeah, it's another one of those. Like, I wouldn't put out a review without being absolutely sure that that was the case. It's such a shame, because this game deserved a fair shot. It really did. Anyway, I'm exhausted after that. Thank you for watching another video. Subscribe. We got anime games on lockdown. I've been playing anime games for a long time, and I guarantee you this type of mistakes do not happen on this channel. Thank you very much for watching. Name's Globku. See you guys next time. Bye.